the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering, of course, your Arizona Cardinals. And this is episode 398 of the podcast. This is a solo pod show. Seth Cox is not, well, I'm actually sitting in my son's apartment in Lubbock, Texas, as I'm here to visit him, help him out after he had wrist surgery. He wrecked his car. He's okay. But he broke his wrist in a car accident when he slid on some ice and hit a guardrail. Everything's fine there. And so I'm recording on a Thursday night. This is our fourth show in the last week, and it's Super Bowl week. In this show, we have four Cardinals connections, four Cardinals what ifs connections to Super Bowl 57, which is between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. Three of these, I think we've talked a little bit about before. I think two of them. Seth and I talked about on one of our bonus shows over the last couple of weeks as we've taken a little bit different format instead of just the one per week, or in the offseason trying to get you guys some more content, a little bit shorter stuff. But one of these actually was a story that was broken Thursday, as it was written by ESPN, and it is something that is a bit of some redemption for some local reporters, and it is a huge what if. Again, this is episode 398 of the podcast, and it is Super Bowl week, and the Cardinals obviously are not in the Super Bowl. No. They still haven't named a head coach. That they're not going to do that till next week. Supposedly, we're down to two candidates. It's Mike Kafka, New York Giants offensive coordinator, and Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. Unless something happens in the next week where there's another candidate, come down to those guys. We've talked enough about that over the last few shows, but this show, I wanted to tell you. These are some what ifs. A couple of them are anecdotes, but these are four Super Bowl connections to the Cardinals that are some what ifs. Let's go ahead and get started with that. The first one, you might have caught my story on it that I wrote about on CardsWire. It wasn't my story. It wasn't. This came from ESPN, but this takes us all the way back a decade ago. This is after the 2012 season. After the 2012 season, the Cardinals had fired general manager Rod Graves and head coach Ken Whisenhunt. It was the first year I covered the team as media in the building, attending games as a credentialed reporter, and it was a fun year to start because they went 4-0. We had a quarterback controversy. Kevin Cobb, John Skelton. John Skelton wins the starting job, but injures his ankle in the season opener, which was Russell Wilson's NFL debut. Kevin Cobb comes in the game to replace Skelton, leads him on a game-winning drive, and then Skelton's job was lost. Kevin Cobb continued with the job. They won the first 4 games of the season before Cobb got injured for the rest of the year, and then after that 4-0 start, they went 5-11. Terrible year. Ken Whisenhunt gets fired. But here's the thing that happened. Andy Reid, he was also fired after that season by the Philadelphia Eagles, taking the Eagles to the Super Bowl, taking them to the playoffs a gazillion times, but he was fired. There was a report, first by then I believe it was Channel 3 sports anchor Tim Ring. He might have been the sports director there, but Tim Ring, local guy, broke the news that said that the Cardinals were close to an agreement to hire Andy Reid as their next head coach in 2013. Adam Schefter also reported the same thing, 95% there on a new deal. And it didn't happen. He was hired by the Chiefs. and there was a lot of crap, a lot of flack that ringtone. Now Schefter does. I'm sure he probably had a whole bunch of stuff in his mentions and on Twitter. Now most of those are jokes about, people's wives leaving them, and if you've ever paid attention to that thing on Twitter. But here's the thing. Ring and other local reporters, they took a lot of flack for that because the Reed thing never happened. But it was real. We found this out 10 years later. It's Super Bowl week. Clark Hunt, team chairman for the Chiefs, and also Reed himself, talking on, because it's media week, and leading up to the Super Bowl, which will be played at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, the Cardinals' home field, on Sunday. And the story, and it was written by ESPN, is that the Cardinals had an airplane. They sent a plane. They sent a plane to Philadelphia at the airport to pick up Andy Reid. He was going to be their head coach. The deal was basically in place. They were going to fly him in. They were going to talk to him, interview him, and a deal would have been done. The Chiefs undercut the Cardinals. How? They interviewed him at the airport. So Clark Hunt and a bunch of front office staff, they go to the airport in Philadelphia and they hit things off. Hunt knew that there was an airplane that he was supposed to catch. He didn't know that the airplane was actually there, waiting for him. And Andy Reid, in the comment in the article, said that he felt bad about it. I mean, he felt bad because they had but he never got on that plane. And the rest is history. 10 years later, he's taken the Chiefs to the playoffs 9 times, to the Super Bowl now 3 times. He has 1 Super Bowl champion. Andy Reid could have been the Cardinals coach. Would the Cardinals be the Chiefs of the NFC with Andy Reid as their head coach? I don't know, but Cardinals fans will hear this and think, oh, Cardinals are cursed. They might be. But this is actually a thing that happened. You have to think back to a decade ago, but if you remember that story that said that the Cardinals were close to hiring Andy Reid, and then they didn't hire him, and then there was some jokes and funny thoughts about inaccurate reporting, guess what? That reporting was in fact accurate. The Chiefs undercut the Cardinals. They undercut them by basically hiring him and coming to an agreement there at the airport where Andy Reid was supposed to get on a plane to travel to Phoenix, to Tempe, down to the facility, and ultimately would have become the Cardinals' next head coach. The rest is history. No, Andy Reid, one of the greatest coaches of our time, and the Chiefs have been dominant. So that is story number 1, the great what-if connection with the Cardinals and this year's Super Bowl. The second one, that's coming up next on Rise Up See Red, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The second what-if connection about the Super Bowl and the Arizona Cardinals. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Got some what-ifs. We talked about the Andy Reid story. Andy Reid could have been the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, but here it gets even better. What if Andy Reid had been the Cardinals head coach and Patrick Mahomes had been their starting quarterback starting in 2017? Here's the thing. Patrick Mahomes wanted to be drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. He knew that the Cardinals wanted him. Okay, we know that. Bruce Arians, former head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, talked about this multiple times. The Cardinals got hosed in the 2017 draft because they wanted to draft a quarterback. And they were sitting with the 13th pick in the draft, and they, goes to pick number 10. They're at pick number 10. There are 2 quarterbacks on the board, Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. And the Cardinals feel really good about the situation. They didn't want to move up for a quarterback, and whoops, bit him in the butt. The Kansas City Chiefs traded up from the 27th pick up to number 10. Then Houston, Texas traded up to the 12th pick. Patrick Mahomes gets off the board. Deshaun Watson comes off the board. The Cardinals don't get a quarterback. Instead, they get Hassan Reddick. That's another story we're going to be talking about on this podcast as well. Hassan Reddick, another what if. But this is actually how Patrick Mahomes actually drafted himself. And this was not, I ran across this on the New Heights podcast. Mahomes was a guest on the New Heights podcast with teammate Travis Kelce and his brother Jason Kelce. Both of them who are playing in the Super Bowl, the first brothers to face each other in the Super Bowl. Kelce was starting center for the Philadelphia Eagles. Travis Kelce, who is the arguably the greatest tight end in the NFL right now for the Chiefs. You can make the argument that either he or George Kittle is better. Neither here nor there. Travis Kelce is an incredible player, but they had Mahomes on the podcast a while back, and Mahomes told a couple of stories about being drafted. Is when he had his top 30 visit with the Chiefs. Matt Nagy, who was the offensive coordinator at the time for the Chiefs, I think he was the quarterback. No, he's the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs at the time. He had prepped Mahomes for the visit and gave him the plays. But so Mahomes looked like a genius. He studied those plays the night before. They spent hours together. They went and ate lunch, came back. Mahomes, knew every single play, knew every single check. He liked the Chiefs, and he thought he was going to be drafted probably late in the first round, which would have put him in a good situation. Teams that were already in the playoffs or had been to the playoffs, but he got the feeling that he was moving up the draft board. Truth is, he wanted to be drafted by the Chiefs, and he basically, and Kelce describes it as drafted himself. He let the Chiefs know, or had his agent tell the Chiefs that, if you want me, you're going to have to come and get me, because I know that, after about 12 picks, I ain't going to be around. Who did the Cardinals, what pick did the Cardinals have in that year? It was number 13. Mahomes knew that the Cardinals were going to draft him. There were a couple of teams that would have drafted him. But we know, and he knew, that Bruce Arians and the Cardinals would have made him the 13th pick in the draft if he made it that far. He didn't want to be drafted by the Cardinals. He wanted to be drafted by the Chiefs. And the rest is history. And so he slipped that information. He had his agent tell him, Brett Veach, that's how that they need to come up again, and the rest is history. Chiefs traded up to the 10th pick overall. They select draft Patrick Mahomes. He basically sits that rookie year behind Alex Smith, and then the rest is history. 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. The 5 years he's been a starting quarterback. The Chiefs have been to the AFC Championship 5 times, and they're now in the Super Bowl 3 times. They have a Super Bowl championship. The Chiefs undercut the Cardinals twice in the last 10 years, changing the course of success. That Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes relationship has been league-changing. Mahomes is arguably, you could say he's a game-changer quarterback, the most talented player we've seen, with the improvisation, the armed talent, the smarts, the mobility, and the volume numbers and impact plays that he has. Those both could have been the Cardinals. The Chiefs undercut the Cardinals twice, first in 2013 and then again in 2017. They could have had Andy Reid. They could have had Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, Cardinals are cursed. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Special Cardinals Talk on the Web, we've got yet another connection to the Cardinals and the Super Bowl, a great what if. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of C Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Yep, still the Chiefs again. This isn't the Chiefs undercutting him. This is the Cardinals making a boo-boo. You know, let's backtrack a year to the 2016 draft, the year before Patrick Mahomes. And the Cardinals have the 29th pick. They're coming off their 13-3 season. Carson Palmer was great. Got hurt late in the year, Tyrann Mathieu, and they went to the NFC Championship game only to get embarrassed. Only get embarrassed by the Carolina Panthers. So they had the 29th pick in the draft. You know who they picked with the 29th pick in the draft? Robert Nkemdiche. An extremely talented, athletic freak of a defensive tackle. Had questions about his character off the field. But the Cardinals vetted him, met with him like 5 times, and they selected him 29th overall. You know who they could have had? Another extremely talented defensive tackle with character questions. Chris Jones. He went number 37 overall to the Kansas City Chiefs. As we know, Nkemdiche was a draft bust. Didn't really amount to anything. He's still trying to stick around in the NFL. But he never did anything with the Cardinals. Ended up getting cut. Got injured. Got overweight. Got cut. And has really done nothing since. An immensely talented young man who never was disciplined enough or worked hard enough to do it. And Jones went in the second round. A lot of teams, every team passed him up because there were some character questions, some off the field questions. But what if the Cardinals had picked Jones over Robert Nkemdiche? Let's look at the numbers. Okay. Since 2016, Chris Jones, 65 sacks. 65 sacks. He had 15.5 sacks this season. It's the second time he's had 15.5 sacks in a season. He had a paltry 2 sacks as a rookie. Went 6.5, 15.5, 9, 7.5, 9, 15.5. You know, Steve Keim, in all his time here as general manager, he stepped down from his post, and it's now Monty Austin. We know that story. That big-time interior defensive lineman was the white whale for Steve Keim. He went after Robert Nkemdiche. That failed. He coveted Quinnen Williams in the 2019 draft. There was some talk that he wanted Williams to be the number 1 pick. Williams has a nice career. He kind of broke out this last year in year 4 for the New York Jets under Robert Saleh. Derek Brown was drafted 1 pick before the Cardinals selected Isaiah Simmons. The Cardinals probably would have selected Derek Brown if both he and Simmons were on the board at the time. Derek Brown would have been a Cardinal. Steve Keim kept trying to find that big-time interior defensive lineman. They could have done it in 2016. Chris Jones. Granted, the whole league passed on him, but Chris Jones is probably the most disruptive outside of Aaron Donald. Outside of Aaron Donald, the most disruptive interior defender in the NFL in terms of pass rushing ability. He is a 4-time Pro Bowler. He was named the first team All-Pro this year. 3 other times. He was a second-team All-Pro selection. And there is no coincidence to the fact of how good the Chiefs have been with Chris Jones kind of as that disrupting force in the middle. Granted, that's because they got Andy Reid and they got Patrick Mahomes, but here we go again. That's Super Bowl 57 and all these what-ifs. What if the Cardinals had drafted Chris Jones instead of Robert Nkemdiche? Imagine the production they would have had from that interior of the defensive line if Chris Jones had been the pick at number 29 overall instead of Robert Nkemdiche. Yeah. Another what if. Coming up next on the Rest of Red Podcast, Best Ever Cardinals Talk on the web, we got one final Super Bowl what if connection. That's Hassan Reddick. That's coming next on Rest of Red. We're back on the Rest of Red Podcast, the Best Ever Cardinals Talk on the web. You know, the 2017 draft, they miss out on Patrick Mahomes. We know the story. I told you the story. Patrick Mahomes told about how he drafted himself. He got the Chiefs. He wanted to play for the Chiefs. He wanted to play for Andy Reid. And makes sense, honestly. Look at the success they've had. The Cardinals ended up drafting Hassan Reddick, a guy super athletic linebacker, super exciting. But Hassan Reddick, the Cardinals had taken a lot of flack for their usage of him and how they let him go and how they misused him. I'm gonna die on this hill probably. The Cardinals weren't the only one they were going to mess up on that. At the time, 2017, when he was drafted out of Temple, he's undersized, 6'1", 235. What is he built like? He's built like an inside linebacker, an off-the-ball guy. Uber athletic. Movement skills, speed, quickness. Senior Bowl, they had him do linebacker drills. He looked great in coverage against running backs. Guess what? The entire league pegged him as a... They were going to move him to off the ball, and it didn't work. It didn't work. He failed in that sense. The Cardinals turned him into a pass rusher, or actually they put him as a pass rusher, and finally he got his big chance in 2020, and he broke out. 12.5 sacks. And those 12.5 sacks parlayed him into a contract with the Carolina Panthers, and then a contract 3-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. Hassan Reddick had 16 sacks this past season for the Eagles. He's had 3 consecutive double-digit sack seasons with 3 different teams, 2020 with the Cardinals, 2021 with the Panthers, and now 2022 with the Eagles. Here's the what if. The Cardinals had the opportunity after 2020. You know, Chandler Jones had requested a trade. They had traded for Marcus Golden and re-signed him. What would have the Cardinals had, or what would have been the career for Hassan Reddick since then? Had the Cardinals decided to trade Chandler Jones heading into 2021 and signing Reddick after he had the 12.5 sack season? I get why they didn't. It looked like a fluky year. And I'll die on this hill. I've said this before. I do not like the narrative that the Cardinals, that surrounds the Cardinals with Hassan Reddick, like they botched that pick. The fact of the matter is, there was no comp that could say that Reddick was going to be a successful and impactful pass rusher. 6'1", 235 guys without long arms, they don't succeed in that position. And there was no way for the Cardinals to have ever seen 2020 happen. Because here's the thing. They had him at inside linebacker in training camp and in the offseason because, guess what? They had injuries at the position. I believe it was, I can't remember the scenario was, but I think it was Dale Buchanan had an injury, and so they were giving him reps, or it was Carlos Dansby. I don't remember the scenario off the top of my head, but so he got all the offseason reps at inside linebacker. It was productive. He had tackles and all that stuff. But what happened after that is Marcus Golden, who was still on his rookie deal at the time, drafted in 2015 in the second round, he tore his ACL 4 games into the season. They moved Hassan to the edge, outside linebacker position. So, he was learning a second position. Now, he played defensive lineman, so he played off the edge as a pass rusher, but not as an outside backer in a 3-4 scheme. That said, he played on the edge. Do you know what sort of pass rushing production he had? It wasn't a lot. It wasn't a lot, in fact. His rookie season with the Cardinals in 2017, He had exactly 2 sacks. 2 sacks, 6 quarterback hits, and that's playing 3/4 of the season as an edge rusher. 2018, that was a disaster. The Cardinals, Bruce Arians retired. They hired Steve Wilkes, and so Reddick had to transition back to off the ball. He was still an outside linebacker, but in a 4-3 scheme, that was a disaster. Didn't work. 2019, same thing. He was playing the position he originally was drafted to do as an inside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme, and he eventually had his job taken by Joe Walker. Late in the year, they decided, Terrell Suggs, who they had signed, they wanted to move on from him. He'd been a bust of a pick as a signing, as a free agent. Didn't do anything over the last 6 weeks he was there. And they wanted to move, since Reddick had failed as an inside backer, they wanted to give him one more shot, put him at outside backer as a pass rusher. Okay, that made sense. Do you want to know how many sacks Hassan Reddick had in 2019? Uno. He had one more than me. Granted, yeah. 1 sack in 2019. 1 sack, 4 quarterback hits. Fast forward to 2020. He looked a little better. He was a rotational pass rusher for the Cardinals. They had Chandler Jones, Devon Kennard. And Reddick was a rotational guy. He had some success. Chandler Jones tears his biceps, and he's done for the year. Reddick is moved into a starting role. He'd been productive so far, but once he was put in the starting role, he went 5-6 games without a sack, and then the explosion came. He had the 5 sacks against the Giants. He finished the season with 12.5. Came into contract year. It looked fluky. Doesn't have the size or length to really look like as a long-term solution, as someone you could count on as a pass rusher off the edge. I get it. But they did see the production. They saw the improvement, and they saw the sacks come in bunches. They also had a player who wanted to be traded going into that final year. The Cardinals, Chandler Jones was aging. He had 1 year left on his deal. If the Cardinals had moved on from Chandler Jones and brought back Hassan Reddick, where would they be now? Jones was awful the next year. He had the 5 sacks in week 1, and then after that, he had 5.5 sacks for the entire rest of the season. He finished with 10.5 sacks, and then he left in free agency to the Raiders. So, combination of 2 things. They could have traded Chandler Jones and gotten draft compensation for him, rather than a fifth round comp pick. They're getting this year's draft in 2022 for Chandler Jones leaving. And they could have had their first round pick, Reddick, back and being productive. After his 12.5 sacks with the Cardinals in 2020, Reddick went on to have 11 sacks with the Carolina Panthers. Now, he signed a 1-year prove-it kind of deal. The bridge had been burned basically with the Cardinals. They wanted him to prove it again. He proved it somewhere else. He got a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Panthers, and got 11 sacks. He signs a 3-year, $45 million contract with the Eagles in this past offseason. And in his first season there, they're now a Super Bowl team. He led the team with 16 sacks, continuing that production. The Cardinals did have interest in bringing him back, but they weren't going to compete with the money that the Eagles offered, and the fact that the Eagles are his hometown team. He gets to go back to Philadelphia, to Pennsylvania, where he played ball at Temple, and he's been fantastic. And so once again, this Super Bowl this weekend, there's a bunch of what-ifs, connections to the Cardinals. You've got Hassan Reddick and his sacks. Cardinals drafted him. The Cardinals kind of botched that move because there was no way to know. Honestly, and I'll say this. Everyone in the NFL made the same mistake. It's just the Cardinals made the mistake because they drafted him. That same mistake would have likely been made by every other NFL team because Reddick showed nothing as an edge rusher. He showed nothing in 2017. He showed nothing in 2019. It wasn't until 2020. And it really only happened after Chandler Jones got hurt for the rest of the season. And even then, there was 5 games in a row. He didn't, no sacks, not even half a sack, nothing. And was streaking. Then the light switch went on. But they had, this year would have been really, really nice to have Hassan Reddick off the edge in 2022. They wouldn't have had to drafted Myjai Sanders and Cameron Thomas. We'll see how that plays out. But Marcus Golden was almost nothing. Hassan Reddick's production would have been welcome. What if with Hassan Reddick? What if with Chris Jones instead of Robert Nkemdiche? What if the Chiefs had not undercut the Cardinals twice in 5 years with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes? These are Super Bowl teams. The Cardinals have stories all across here. The stories you want the Cardinals to be involved with the Super Bowl or when they're in the Super Bowl, not these what-ifs. But hey, maybe it'll happen sometime. The Chiefs stole Andy Reid. Patrick Mahomes got himself stolen by the Chiefs. The Cardinals messed up by taking Robert Nkemdiche over Chris Jones. Whoops. And they didn't take a chance on Hassan Reddick. They should have. Chandler Jones was aging. He did, after his 5.5 sacks in week 1 in 2021, he only had 5.5 sacks the rest of the season. And his impact fell off a cliff. If they'd taken a chance on Reddick, believed in him, I think that would have been something else. Anyway, Super Bowl stories, what ifs, Cardinals connections. That wraps up edition 398 of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The next show will be later this week. I probably will not record it on Tuesday night. That is Valentine's Day. Seth and I are both married. If we want to stay married, we've got to take care of that stuff. But the Cardinals should have a head coach by then. There will be a new Super Bowl champion. We'll talk about both in that show. Thanks for listening. This is Jess, RootCarsWire.com. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.